Hey everybody, my name's Pete. I'm an art director at Epic Games. I grew up drawing, got into computer graphics while I was exploring architectural and technical drawing as a high school student. I graduated from Savannah College of Art and Design in 2000. I've been making games since then. And I came to Epic in 2005 because I really wanted to make sci-fi art. I began as a high poly modeler. I was focused on props and environment art. And most of my work was for Unreal Tournament 3 and the Gears of War series. You can see on the screen a bunch of the stuff that I made back in the day. And in 2011, we built a small team to develop Fortnite, and I've been on the team since then. I wanted to ask you guys, who all has played Fortnite? Wow, that's pretty awesome. So over the years, Fortnite has been worked on by a ton of amazing game developers. I wanted to come here today and present a lot of the work that shaped Fortnite into what it is today. And I'm going to start with our gritty, more serious art style that we had way back at the start, and talk about how we hit our initial stylized approach, and then how we iterated and refined our environments and characters through our launch period of Fortnite Save the World last summer. So the original concept of Fortnite, I'm going to read this. It's a survival horror game that mixed third-person action built around social fortifications in a dynamic day-night cycle. Scavenge by day, defend at night. It's Minecraft meets The Walking Dead in an HBO-styled world where loners die quickly and extinction is just a heartbeat away. Social survival, work together or die alone. These are some of the original mood boards and reference that we put together built around that concept. We had the idea that the world was going to be scary and overwhelming, shrouded in mist, and be really claustrophobic and lead to a lot of just really high tension, high intensity gameplay. I'm pretty sure when I was putting this deck together and going through all of our old stuff, this is the very first Fortnite screenshot ever. These are our original white box prototype meshes that were made to prove out the building system and our walls and how these things would fit together on a modular grid so that we could construct the game. We were really excited about getting going and getting straight into development, so we went straight into doing concept art and paint overs. We went with a lot of the typical things you would expect from the initial mood boards of a lot of gray and brown, a lot of really industrial looking things, pretty drab, but also, you know, the intent was there to reinforce the initial mood. We also may have invented the Stranger Things creature up in the sky. Don't tell anyone. One of the things we knew we wanted to do was make really, really awesome creatures. And we started off with this concept of the creatures that come out of the mist and are there to basically eat your soul. So that's what that guy does, is he is the soul taker, and we've got some other cool original concepts of some of the original creature ideas, including the guy who later became the Smasher. You can see him down there with his big tree trunk hammer fist thing. And part of the initial brief of the project too is that we wanted to have a zombie element. We weren't quite sold on that idea because we were like, it's 2011, everybody's making zombie games. Are we really gonna do a zombie game? We gotta make it unique, we gotta make it our own. So we came up with the idea that the zombies would also be a part of this whole mist supernatural element. So the zombies were basically all possessed by the mist, and you can see they're, you know, rotting flesh and mist legs coming out of the front, and the guy's skull has popped out of his mouth, and he's definitely looking pretty freaky. We also started building up our environment art as well to prove out that we could take those initial prototype meshes and make them into usable assets to build a world with. So these are our first environment shots out of Unreal Engine 3. So as we were putting this all together, we got to a point in the development of the game where we knew that we were doing this dynamic day-night cycle We had dynamic building and destruction. And one of the things that I had started looking at trying to figure out was, how are we going to make a realistic, immersive version of breaking down walls, the idea of I'm pickaxing into a wall, and it's going to start to erode away the wall right where I'm hitting it, and there's going to be structural beams and wires and insulation and all the crap that's inside a wall. And we're like, how do you do that? I still don't even know how I would do that. So we were thinking about that, and we were also thinking about what we were going to do for the long term of the project. And as much as the initial art approach was really cool and something that we all liked a lot, we were all passionate about it, everybody was excited about it, we knew it wasn't the right choice. We were thinking about long-term games, games as a service, free-to-play games, these types of things that people would engage with for hundreds of hours, if not years of engagement. And what we saw was a lot of those games tended to be brighter or more stylized. And we even had some data from back in the Gears of War days that people would gravitate towards our brighter multiplayer maps as opposed to the ones that were more of a gray-brown, desaturated, bleak type of feel. So we went back to the drawing board on some concept art, and one of our guys came up with this amazing piece of art that the moment I saw this, I was like, hell yeah, we have got to make this. It was such a cool combination of taking some of the core feel of the project and that mix of like apocalyptic stuff and dirty stuff, but also putting this really fun, stylized, sweeping gestural form to the main shape of the building and getting bright sunlight and blue sky and a lot of just really beautiful elements mixed in with how kind of horrifying the core idea was. So we got into more building sketches, and you guys can see, if you've played Battle Royale, that's the first version of Tomato Town right there. He was actually a clown instead of a tomato guy. And we started doing environment props. These started to reflect some of the same shapes that we were seeing in that big, huge, sweeping building form. We have a lot of these props kind of as they're shown here today, but we've pulled back from some of the, human bits inside trash cans is not something we're doing anymore. We declared pretty early on that we wanted to shoot for a teen rating. So if you want a teen rating, stay away from dismembered body parts and blood in your game. As part of figuring this out, we took a bunch of the existing props that we had and started just putting freeform deformations on them inside 3D Studio Max. This felt pretty weird and unnatural to me, given how I sort of thought about things back then and how these were all objects that were designed and engineered to be a certain way, and then we were just taking them and warping them out and making them look kind of funny and broken, but eventually we got used to it. We also took our photo source textures and we started doing a lot of Photoshop work and cutout filters and layering the cutout filtered versions on top of themselves over and over to get more clear color separations into the shapes of the original photo source textures, and also, ramping up the colors and brightness and saturation. And some of the other initial modular building pieces we took and started bringing in some of that really cool expressive shape language into the window frames and door frames, even though we knew we were going to stick with the grid-based approach where all of our modular pieces have these, very rigid square edges. We felt we could bring that feeling of the original concept art into the world by just bringing that gestural form into all of the shapes that exist inside each sort of atomic unit. So pretty quickly, we were able to get from that initial exterior feel to this, and the interior to this. And all of this was starting to feel a lot brighter, a lot more fun. It's still very, it was still very set in the lighting and post-process and how the fog is. It didn't this hasn't proven out, the full style of where we're at today, but we kept making some content in this style. We got our initial Tomato Town Pizza Clown guy, and we also pretty early on felt the need to prove out the idea of building out tons of props to reinforce like the believability of the space and figure out what are we actually going to fill this world with that players can harvest and gather their resources, and can we actually make this world, as it gets more and more cartoony, still feel believable and natural and something where players have a mapping in their mind of, I understand where I am because these are clearly kitchen props. These are the first stylized character concepts that were done for Fortnite. They're really cool, but also weren't quite hitting the sort of teen-rated feel or the sort of endearing quality that we were going for. We did like the guy with the skull hoodie, so we took him and refined him a bit, and we got to our initial concept for our first Fortnite guy. And what we liked about this was just how clean his silhouette got and how a lot of the sort of grimy details were cleaned up, but he still had, a little bit of that scavenger kind of badass feel. So we went in and we modeled him, and it turned out really cool seeing this guy with these really cool elongated proportions and feeling like a really, really cool stylized scavenger. So we got him in the game, and there he is. We also went back over our creatures, and instead of making them terrifying, they're a little bit, they're still scary to some degree, but they have more of a sense of mischief about them, and we used simpler line work in them, and we started bringing in some of the swirling shapes, like you can see on the guy's claw hands, more of that swirl shape that reinforces the idea that they were coming from the mist. And we also toyed with the idea of doing more of a standard zombie guy in a sort of funky way, but we eventually realized we loved our original Husk design so much that we had to do a stylized pass on him as well. So you can see we cleaned up all the gore and gross stuff, we cleaned up the silhouette, we simplified a lot of the details, but we had to keep the skin hoodie, which was one of the, I guess, the iconic feature of this guy as a zombie design, and that's been there since the beginning. So we modeled this guy out, and we modeled out the rest of our creatures, and we got everything up and running in UE3. And after we got to that point, we announced the game at the VGAs in 2011, and we had a cinematic trailer for that. Shortly after that, we constructed a sizzle reel internally, and this is like the oldest real gameplay video I could find of Fortnite, and I wanted to just share it with you guys. It's 2.5 minutes long, and I'm just going to let it play.
All right, clear! Grab what you can!
We really liked that Durburger head. It's pretty awesome. So this is a good time to talk about how that was our initial stab at doing stylized with respect to the original vision of the game. And it was sort of what I look back on and consider our starting point. We really liked the direction of the game. We wanted to keep improving it, and instead of trying to go into like a really aggressive, early access launch in 2012, we decided to hold the game back and keep working on it. One of the big things we did there was we converted the game and all of its assets from running on Unreal Engine 3 to Unreal Engine 4. So this was sort of a big refactor of all of our art. And from here, I'm going to talk about some of the work we did there on environments and characters. So we kept moving forward with environment concept art and continuing to factor in the cool stylized shape language, but paying a little bit more respect to the fact that our buildings would be on a grid. We also knew, since we were making the world a believable place, we were going to need a ton of assets to fill out the random level generation system. So we took a shotgun approach to doing concept art and started generating just massive amounts of stuff. This is a sheet showing just how many different variants of beds there are in the game. And we made all of these as bespoke props. And we did this concept art also to prove out that shape language would continue to work throughout a lot of different ideas. Oops, sorry. So we kept seeing coming up in the concept art this cool like kinked line work and how the silhouettes were really funky, but some of the things were getting a little bit too funky, so we kind of did a little bit of direction setting and guide work to kind of set things up in a format where people could wrap their head around how to stylize these things better. So the idea was, if you were starting with a box or a rectangle, you could taper it up, you could taper it down, you could bulge it, you could pinch it, and we had a few other examples of sort of squiggly lines that we didn't want to do. And we got into a really easy way for people to look at a real-world object and break it down into its major forms, and then get rid of all of the parallel lines and make the shapes feel like they belong in the world of Fortnite related to some of the concept art we were doing. So this let us use photo reference instead of having to do concept art for every single thing. Here's just a couple examples of some things that are typically extremely mundane props in most game worlds. But when we were working on this, we were really excited about building all of this content, because using that stylized shape language and the bright colors and the textures really made these sort of normal, everyday things feel much more interesting to look at. Our awesome stylized shapes didn't always work. When we eventually got to the point of adding crates to the game, our crates did not stack, which set some of the level designers off a little bit. So we made some alternate versions of our crates that did stack, and we were able to solve that problem that way. And then we had other examples where the shape language was also kind of fighting with gameplay and gameplay design, where we had some weapons and some guns where the style was just getting too exaggerated and too funky, where if you looked at a third-person shooting view of the gameplay of this, you can't really tell what the character is aiming at. Similarly, in our player-built walls, we were able to use our shape language really effectively on some of the broader shapes like our metal panels, but some of the finer shapes like the level 1 wood or the level 1 brick, like the way we were building these assets, we couldn't really keep consistency in the shape language. All the bricks, for example, are all pretty rectilinear, and they don't really exhibit the exact same art style. So this was sort of a consistency bug that kept getting into my brain. We also worked through refactoring all of our textures. All of the cutout style photo source textures went through a new process where we hand painted them. Some of the failings of the cutout filter were that it would sort of just make a noisy mess out of certain things, and we just needed the artist's touch of going through these assets and hand painting them to really make them feel like more intentional and more full of character. the props themselves were also all being hand painted at that point. And one of the elements from the original style and tone of the game was the lived-in world, which I was pretty convinced we had to keep. Getting the wear and tear and really intentional bits of grunge and dust and scratches and leaky bolts and all the things that add a ton of character to these assets were things that we stuck with. Another thing that we've been doing, we're still working on actually, as a point of Fortnite being a living project, we're going through and adding normal maps and spec maps to a lot of the tiling textures that never had any. So this is just an example of kind of the potential of where we can go. This is also showing that we fully converted over from colored spec to physically based rendering. So that was also a sort of daunting process because we had manufactured so many props with colored spec. One of the rendering engineers came to me one day and said, "Hey Pete, you know, Fortnite is the only Unreal Engine 4 game using colored specular, and we don't want to support that in the engine anymore." And I was just like, oh, fuck. So we had a million textures to go fix, and we did it, and it's great because it looks way better now. But yeah, that was fun. We've also iterated the look and feel of our lighting and post-process quite a bit over the years. We started off with that original kind of heavy depth of field, really claustrophobic feel. And over time, as we've brightened things up and cleaned up the artwork, it's just felt very natural to reduce depth of field and crispen things up over time. One of the problems that took a lot of effort to solve and many years to solve was the overall sort of flat look of the game. This is a recent screenshot, but it's just missing one feature called distance field ambient occlusion. And when you turn that feature on, you get that. So going from that to that was pretty amazing. If you're doing a dynamically lit game in UE4, I would highly recommend using DFAO. It's an amazing feature. Given the whole game was lit with just a skylight and a directional light, that added the extra bit of depth and fake bounce light that the game had been missing for years. So I just wanted to take a second and show off some of the other content that we've made. We have a bunch of different environment themes, and in the Save the World side of Fortnite, we have some pretty cool content that took a lot of gameplay time and a lot of effort to get to, and I feel like a lot of people probably haven't seen it. So we have a desert environment that we worked on, and we're working on more of this content. And we also built a full tile set of sort of Transylvania-inspired Halloween-themed assets. And this was also a perfect testing ground for the new volumetric fog in UE4, which is one of the most fun features to play around with. It's very hard to not overdo it. We used it pretty liberally in this environment, but we were also kind of like, is volumetric fog the next lens flare? Like, we gotta be careful here. So the next thing I'm going to talk through is character art. One of the things that we knew from the start that we wanted was a lot of diversity in the game. You know, characters are an expression of the player and how everybody is different. And we knew we weren't going to go with a full-on character customization system that lets you morph your face or change your skin tone and all that kind of stuff. We wanted to do more curated art, so we've been working very hard over the years to always make sure that we're building out a lot of different looking people so that we can have a lot of different representation. When we started, Fortnite was not about any single character. Every character was this scavenger person, a survivor in the sort of bleak world. And some of those initial designs were really cool, but we also knew we wanted a ton of variety. And our initial approach to getting there back in the UE3 version was character customization. You saw some of the results of this in the video we played earlier where everybody was running around with the burger hat. And what this sort of led to was a bunch of really, really silly, goofy stuff. We didn't really have a cohesive way of doing tons and tons of scavenger gear as the thing that was going to define the IP. So we did wacky hats, silly backpacks, and after we went through some of these accessory designs, we manufactured a sea of characters that are all things that are kind of they're still in limbo in our content. Basically, they're all not really enough meat to build an IP from. We could get like the irony of being a beekeeper or a Canadian Mountie or a raver girl or whatever idea we came up with. We were kind of thinking about this in the same way that we thought of the environment content, where we felt like we're just going to make everything and it'll be cool. But what we found was we got a lot of feedback from publishing groups and a lot of people who were looking at the game feeling like the characters really weren't heroic enough or cool enough to really be appealing to a wide mass market audience. And we did sort of a key art exercise to look at them together. And they look nice from a technical perspective, but they're kind of a hodgepodge from a design point of view. So our solution to this was we converted the game from more of a play your way type of experience to more of a class-based design. And our first classes that we started looking at were core to the gameplay were shooting and building. And we started designing these outfits on our existing body that we had. And we felt like they were okay, but they weren't really solving the problem that we were facing, which is making really cool, awesome heroes. So we came up with the idea to do new body types. And here was some of the first pass stuff that we came up with for our soldier. And we worked with a lot of different people on these concepts. These revisions were all very anime. They were a little too noisy. They just didn't feel, they felt cool, but not like the game we wanted to make. And eventually we got to this guy, who you might recognize as Jonesy. This was like another aha moment in concept art in the development of our game, where we saw this guy and we're like, hell yeah, that is it. So we took that and just pasted him into a screenshot of the world just to verify we weren't crazy. And we said, yep, that feels pretty good, so let's go make him. And at the same time we were making him, we started building out concepts for the builder guy, and we wanted that to be on the large body type. So we started prototyping what that would look like and doing silhouettes and started building out a dinosaur chart. And eventually we got to full concept on the large body type constructor. And we looked at him and we said, man, this is a nice piece of art, but we're kind of back to square one, where he's like kind of cool, but not really cool. And we weren't quite sold. Like the soldier was kind of automatically cool because he's a soldier. But this guy was like, I don't know. So we kind of took a step back and started to think a little bit more high level about what would a whole entire cast of characters look like, and what do those things look like in a lot of other properties. And we looked at everything. We looked at every reference point you could imagine. We looked at all the movies, we looked at all the games, and the things that kind of stuck with us as we were looking through things were the Ghostbusters property was really cool because, well, we didn't like that they were all the same guy wearing the same outfit. We knew we didn't want to do that, but we really liked the idea that they were fighting magic with technology. And we also looked at the really cool sense of diversity that G.I. Joe has, where you can have a ninja with a soldier with a American Indian, but we felt like this was presented in a cooler way than our old sense of variety was. And then with the Matrix, all of those characters have this amazing sense of style, and they feel really high fashion, and they feel unique from one another, but also cohesive. And for the way that my mind was working around the idea of cohesiveness, just the idea that they all had sunglasses as a thing, just tied it all together. So we came up with this idea that we were going to represent all of our class-based hero abilities with these sci-fi gadgets that would explain away our ability to do magic in the game. We went through a whole entire process of figuring out what these were going to look like. What we landed on was the idea of referencing a lot of the movies that we grew up with. You know, at Epic, a lot of us are 80s kids. So a lot of the cool sci-fi movies from back then were things like RoboCop and Back to the Future and Ghostbusters. And we tied into a lot of those materials and shape designs and really trying to make things feel like they could have been built in Doc Brown's garage, as opposed to coming from, you know, a sci-fi factory or H.R. Giger or Gears stuff, or, you know, doing the sort of typical. We have one of the rules in all of our sci-fi is we don't have any of the tech lines with a 45-degree angle cut and then the line continues. Like, yeah, so we stayed away from what we felt were kind of tropes in sci-fi and tried to do something that felt more like a pop culture reference. And so after going back over the constructor, where we got to was this version, where now he's got gadgets and gear and a bunch of cool stuff on him. And we felt like, yes, this is pretty awesome. And he's even got his cool deployable base power-up device. So we went through all of our existing heroes and we built all the models based off of the concept art that we had and incorporating all their new gadgets. Like our ninja has his jump boots, and our Outlander has the power punch, you know, rocket-powered fist glove thing, and our constructor's got his power pack, and our commando, the commando kind of got the short straw and only got grenades, but we still made them cool sci-fi blue glow techie grenades. What we found was going back and looking at all these heroes and looking at the concept that they came from, we did them all in this style that was from the original Jonesy concept. And this style was sort of an attempt to get to a lot of creases and planarizations in the face. And we went through and we diagrammed how this could work on face anatomy for any person or any hero, sort of starting off as a generic guy. What were the creases and planarizations that you would make? How would you simplify a nose? How would you simplify the lips to really fit into Fortnite style? And so our first version of this came out pretty cool, is how we felt about it. And we stuck with this for quite a while, and we built out a bunch of our heroes in this style. And the more time we spent with them, the more we kind of realized, like, hey, you know, maybe they're not really as good looking as they should be. Like, maybe what we did with the planarization and the cuts in the face, it wasn't really looking attractive or appealing. It was mostly done to try and fit in with a lot of the edgy, angular style that had been done in the rest of the game. So just pulling like our constructor head into Photoshop and doing a very quick brush over the cheekbone, I was kind of like, all right, this feels way better. We got to go work through all of these face designs and make everything feel more natural. And we even went over some of our character concepts and reinvented them entirely with more of the eye towards the fashion idea of just making them feel like they had cooler, more relatable clothes and making them a little bit less sort of video gamey. She was a good example of where we reduced the number of planes in the face quite a bit and just had the sense of a crease on the jaw and just a little bit of a crease over the crest of the nose and a little bit of planarization in the hair. And that was enough to make her really feel like she fit with the rest of the game, but also letting her face be beautiful at the same time. And we went and did this over our soldier as well and reworked his body proportions and reworked the face. But we still weren't totally sure if we had nailed it yet. We wanted to do everything we could to be positive that we were on the right track with our style. So we took the newer soldier face and we started doing a bunch of paint overs and a bunch of new style explorations. And we started showing these to more and more people and getting people's feedback and testing them and getting data around what we were doing. I'm sure you guys are disappointed we didn't go with number 4. And it turned out that we landed on something pretty close to the original take on that guy. And we weren't as far off as we thought. All we really needed to do was go through and clean up the excessive edging and excessive planarization and rework the proportions, but sticking to the same initial character designs. So you can see the guy on the right is definitely comes across as more appealing and more endearing, whereas the one on the left, like when we made it, we were like, sweet, this guy's awesome. But after taking the time to go over it once more, we were like, oh, we had that artist moment of like, that thing I made that I thought looked awesome, I looked at it a year later and I was like, what the fuck was I thinking? Like, the new thing was so much better. So we also got into expression testing just to verify that this stuff was going to work in the long run. We didn't have a ton of animation work going on at the time, so we had to kind of force this through the pipeline to see how well things would really work. And using that newer shape, newer, smoother anatomy to inform the new bodies helped out a lot as well. We cleaned up a lot of the edgy, angular creases in like the calf muscles and the forearm muscles, and we kept things angular, and we kept our silhouettes really efficient, but also were able to find the appeal that we were missing before. At the same time, we were working through our female body types, and our medium female and our smaller female were definitely easier and more natural to make for us than the larger body type, who required a bit of iteration. When we first started concept art for Penny, our female constructor, we were set on the idea of making her compatible with the male constructor in PvP by making the silhouette be exactly the same. And this idea seemed like it was a sound idea from a gameplay perspective. And we went back and forth on concepts for this, and we tried to solve her by, doing a bunch of different face concepts and a bunch of different outfits and a bunch of variants there. But ultimately what we had to do was get away from the fact that she was a larger set woman but had these really skinny, spindly legs. She just looked really unnatural. So we went back to the drawing board and did some new concepts. We had a more natural form to the body. We got rid of the idea that we had to match the PvP mode so precisely. And this was a sort of first pass concept of Penny that was more country girl. And then we pulled in the sort of cool jacket and some of the tech elements on the leg and gave her more of a cool, heavy utility belt. And here was our final version of Penny. So we were really proud of this character. It took a lot of development, but ultimately we landed in a place that felt really good. We had a ton of positive fan feedback on this character. And after going back and redoing everyone in the game, this was our final cast of heroes that we shipped with last summer. So I'm getting close to the end. I wanted to just talk through a few final thoughts. One of the big things that I sort of learned on Fortnite was we defined a lot of rules, and for me, being a first-time art lead and art director, I didn't really know how to form a rule and then figure out how to break a rule. Things like the shape language became kind of an obsession for me, given my background in modeling. I was very concerned with form, more so than the overall picture, and I struggled to see the forest through the trees when I was judging individual models. So we tried really, really hard to force that edgy style into everything, and ultimately it made it take way longer for us to get to where we needed to be with our characters. Just understanding that the techniques you use to develop a style don't need to be used everywhere took a long time for me to understand. Like, if you want the impression that the game is fun and wacky and vibrant and funky with all of the shapes that it has, you just have to use them in the most prominent places. Like, players are constantly interacting with door frames and windows and things like that, which is where we would really have to push those shapes and that style versus feeling the necessity to apply that rule to every single asset. So understanding that the art style is the sum of the parts, not repeating the same idea over and over. Another takeaway for me on Fortnite is just the idea of getting out of my comfort zone. I think, given the types of things that I was used to making before I worked on Fortnite, I never really saw myself getting so into stylized art. I thought that when I came on the team at the start, it was going to be something that we would turn around quickly and ship quickly, but what it turned into for me was an avenue to learn how to do a whole new kind of art. So it's been a real journey exploring the art style, figuring out what works, what doesn't work. And the payoff is now we have an art style that people look at and people consider it unique, and that feels really rewarding to myself and the team. And my final thought for you guys is the biggest test on Fortnite was basically we knew that we believed in this game. The team believed in the game. I believed in the game. And I believed in the team. And the biggest point there is don't give up. When you're working on something that is taking forever and is a slog of redoing and redoing and redoing, I just wanted to tell you guys that finding a way to persist and finding a way to do what you can to take control of the little things and find a way to make them better for yourself while you're going through the process of having to slow down to speed up and having to redo things and having to get through like big demos or other things that are forcing functions for you to be maybe not necessarily doing the exact thing that you would prioritize. I would just encourage you that if you believe in that project, just stick with it and don't give up. So I want to thank all the people who've worked so hard to make Fortnite happen, and I want to thank you all for coming to see my presentation. Thank you. I have time for questions. I finished slightly earlier than I thought I would, but anybody have anything? I believe you're meant to go to the microphones, is what I was told.
Test 1, 2. Can you hear me?
Barely. Speak up a little.
Okay. So, there we go. My question is, you shared some great examples of all the iteration you guys did over and over to kind of land on that style. Was that factored into the schedule from the get-go, or the philosophy of how you're approaching the game, or did it kind of emerge organically and schedules had to change? And also, how did you incorporate feedback in that whole iterative process, whether it was internally or externally? And can you give examples of that?
That is a very good question. Building Fortnite was a very organic process within Epic. There were a lot of things that came up along the way where the team was asked to sort of change target or evolve the project along with the fact that Epic as an organization was evolving from being a company that shipped boxed products to being its own publisher. So there were inflection points along the development timeline where it was like, your schedule's basically thrown out because we know we're just doing a whole new thing now. I know that's a little bit vague, but things like we got an opportunity to do a Game Informer cover in something like 2014. So we automatically added time to our schedule of developing the game to deal with the fact that we were creating demo assets all of a sudden, when otherwise we might not have normally taken the time to do that. Or we did a stage demo at one point with Apple to show off the Metal API, and that was a whole thing of like, all right, so the people who were making the game are making that demo now, so now we kind of need more time to ultimately deliver. And just the way that Epic tends to work is people will be allocated to a project, and then there might be a project that has a great opportunity to do a demo or do something, and those people might shift from this project to that project. So the development timeline of the game was, I'm not quite sure how intentional anybody can really say it is in hindsight.
And the feedback process of whether you're doing it internally or bringing in, like how did that factor into your iterative process? Oh,
sure. We had a few moments where we, before we were fully sure that we were going to be our own publisher, we had some publishers come in and look at the game. But at some point, all of the feedback was driven internally. And then we also had probably 2 to 3 years of beta testing and user experience testing in our UX lab inside Epic. So we were getting feedback through both of those mechanisms as well. Some of the character art we put a bunch of images into a survey, and we had people go through and kind of rank, how do you feel about this character? Is it, I hate it? Is it meh?
Swipe right.
Kind of cool? Is it fucking awesome? So we went through that on a bunch of our character art. And, for a lot of that stuff that was in that middle space, it was kind of 50-50. And we were like, all right, we need to do better than that.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Hi.
Over here. So my question is, with such an organic way for you to arrive to the style that you got, and with it being such a long process, how do you ensure that the way that you stylize the environment and the way that you stylize the characters is consistent? And also, do you find any challenges that were perhaps more challenging just based on the fact that you were working in a stylized environment?
Sure. I think one of the big things for me was just learning that I didn't have to make the characters feel exactly like the environment, that we could get away with having them take on a bit of their own style, which wasn't apparent to me at the beginning. I was always like, when I was a kid, I would watch cartoons and see like, oh, okay, I can tell there's a watercolor painted background, but I know exactly what the rock on this frame is going to move because it's clearly cell painted.
Right.
And that inconsistency would be like a little bit of a deal breaker for me, just in how I have a little bit of an analytical side on top of my more artistic side. So learning that we could do the characters in their own style was the secret to making them good, because I think the early iterations we were trying too hard to make them analytically cohesive with the environment.
Right.
And what was the second part of your question again? Can you repeat it?
Were there any challenges for you that were even more challenging just based on the fact that it was a stylized IP? For example, maybe in building modular sets, for example, for the environment.
Yeah, I mean, going with that shape language definitely complicated some things. You have to be really concerned with your collision and how players move through the world. Doorways, for example, you couldn't have them be wide at the bottom and thin at the top, because a player will run in and their head might clip where it's angling up. So there's all kinds of like tiny little gotchas that we went through. But overall, I think a lot of it felt pretty natural as an evolution of what we'd been doing in the past. I made a lot of modular environment sets for Gears of War and UT, so we had a lot of experience there, and we were able to get off the ground pretty quickly with Fortnite with all that knowledge that we already had.
Do you find yourselves having to standardize a lot of things like doorways just so it would fit all of your characters, or do you guys just do a...
Yeah, we have like a minimum size. Like, we want to make sure that all the big characters can get through any portal. And then we have other standardized sizes for AI as well in the PvE game. So there are definitely a lot of rules there that had to be learned over time.
Just one more quick question. You mentioned earlier that you were trying to transition from your hand-painted textures into adding normal maps to them. How are you finding that transition? Are you running into a lot of issues where like maybe the normal maps are not really helping sell the look, I guess, or the appeal of the textures?
We haven't done tons of them yet, so I don't have a thorough answer, but I think I know what you're getting at, because ultimately it's probably going to be a little bit of a rabbit hole where a lot of the diffuse textures have light and shadow already painted into them, and we're going to have to pull back from that and probably let the artists have a little freedom to interpret those textures and say, all right, well, this brick wall isn't going to be exactly the same anymore. I'm kind of redoing it with I'll do a model in ZBrush and we'll bake it out again. And so there will probably be a lot of that in that work.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, love the look of the game, the look you arrived at. The success is really well deserved, I think.
Thank you.
This is a pretty simple question, and you almost touched on it. Scaling of props is a conscious decision to keep things maybe a little larger than would be natural compared to the characters. How did you...
Our props are huge.
Yeah.
They're enormous. It's actually pretty ridiculous, and a lot of our marketing materials required us to like go be like, all right, let's maybe make this rock or this car a little bit smaller. And the intent there is, you can only run so many actors in a level, and you also have the gameplay consideration of every little thing a player is running to harvest is a new gameplay objective. So we definitely had a point where some of the props that we were doing were too small, and we just worked hand in hand with the level designers to figure out like, okay, there's really nothing smaller than a mailbox in this game because there's no point to it. It's just going to slow people down or get in the way, which, in some respects, it makes it so you can't as finely detail certain areas as you might want to, but the benefit is that it keeps your levels pretty clean and easy to read, and people can plot their course from point A to point B pretty easily when you have the right scaled props.
Great, thank you.
Great talk, by the way, and
Thank
big
you.
fan of the game. I've been playing it a lot.
Thanks.
My question is, as an art director, you said at the very end you were talking about persistence and how finding that persistence to continue to go even through constant iteration and reiteration is very important. So as an art director, were there challenges for getting the team on board for reiteration and constant iteration? Is that like difficult?
Yeah, for sure. We just basically had to keep talking to everybody and let them know, hey, this game's going to come out and it's going to be awesome, and just get everybody hyped up about the future of the game and how we knew we were building something really unique. Like just the idea of going into a world and smashing a bunch of stuff and getting all the crap and building a cool fort and all of the, metagame systems that we built are fairly compelling once you get into them if you're that type of gamer. So we knew we were onto something, and I think a lot of the team believed in that.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm working in the launch department for a game company. You just say every time you improve your character, sometimes you improve your character, you are discussing with the launch team, right? And when your two team have different option, how did you convince them, or how did they convince you? That's a question.
Sure. I mean, for us, it was just about transparency and showing people work in progress and talking through where it's going. And I think every step that we took it wasn't hard to get agreement on as being the right step. So it was a fairly organic process. I'm sorry it's a little vague, but we just worked hand in hand, and eventually we got there.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks for the amazing talk. And my question is, were there any artists, like either concept artists or 3D artists, that were like very specialized in realistic style, but was very not getting used to this kind of style? Like how would you like help them to overcome this obstacle? Sure. So we have a number of people who have spent a lot of time doing realism, and I mean, I'm one of them. It's mostly about coaching through the ideas of simplification, exaggeration. If you're going to put a bolt on a thing, that bolt should probably be 5 times the size of a real world bolt. And one of the benefits we had was we built a ton of content early on with a really small team who all kind of got the style. So we had a ton of stuff that we could point people to and say, well, the thing you're building is kind of similar to this, so why don't we look at this example? And we just had tons of visual examples for people to look at and follow and learn from. So most people were pretty able to make the transition. You know, it was definitely, there's a different level of speed certain artists will take to do that, but everyone who's come onto the team has been able to get up to speed and be productive within a couple of weeks. Thank you so much.
Just a quick question. Thanks, great talk, and
Thank you.
Love the art style. It's fascinating to see the progression, especially how you smooth the face, ends up reminding me a lot of stop motion, like Leica and toys. So my fanboy question is, any chance you'll release like an art book or a website showing art progression or toys?
Oh man, we'll get there. Yeah, we don't have a ton of people in the department to take on those types of things, but we have a ton of source material, and I'm really excited about the idea of doing that. So I'm right there with you. I hope it happens. Any last questions?
Did you make some significant changes in the engine's rendering to deal with stylized visuals?
The big feature that we got for Fortnite was the one I talked about a little bit in the lighting, which was the distance field ambient occlusion. I think if it wasn't for Fortnite, we probably would not have come up with that solution. It was definitely custom made for what we were doing on Fortnite. And one of the other features that we really special requested about a year ago or so was the volumetric fog. So that really improved a lot of the depth in the image, and being able to see fog that actually shadows in the world was pretty dramatic. But for most of the course of the development, we were working with all of the engine builds that came from the engine team without a lot of custom features for stylized. In fact, most of what we incorporated was more of the features that are geared towards filmic and photoreal, and where that sort of is going for us in the game is we're maintaining the style of our content, but I think the rendering style of the game from a technical perspective is actually skewing more realistic and closer to becoming real-time rendered Pixar film style of visual, where we're going to get a little bit more material definition and material separation and all the things that you would associate with more of a high-end rendered thing.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Love the artwork, by the way. It's fantastic looking
Thank
stuff. When individual artists are working on iterating things, did they keep ownership of the asset they were iterating through, or did you tend to swap over artists?
It's a good question. It's a little bit of both. I try my hardest to let an artist keep ownership of a thing. I think it's sort of the management question of how do you coach somebody to get it to the point where it fits into the game and is shippable, and they learn from that asset so that the next one they make, they're doing it at a higher quality level and faster. So I try very hard to make sure people hold on to their work, but there is also sometimes where the schedule just doesn't allow for it, and you're like, all right, we're going to pass this thing off to this person, and this task might go over here. So, over the many years we worked on it, a little bit of both happened, but my personal preference is to make sure we're giving the feedback to the artists so that they know how to do the work correctly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming.